Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is a podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah. It's Friday, so we are a little bit off in our normal schedule, but as I mentioned in the last episode, I have an extra episode this week. I had an interview scheduled with our author today, who is Connie Berry, on October 9th, and those of you who have been listening for a while probably maybe heard me mention that day was my dad's birthday. It would have been his 80th. It was also the 6th-month anniversary of his funeral, which I officiated at. So it was a very hard day for me, and Connie was very gracious and agreed to reschedule. She was actually on vacation at the time in France, and so we were going to reschedule for that following week, but then they were having internet issues, and it was one thing after another. So we finally settled down sat down and had our conversation this week, and now I get to share this interview with you. So I'm grateful that Connie was willing to be flexible, and grateful that we found time to reschedule because we had a lovely conversation. So that's the story of that. But I hope your week is going well. It is Friday. So for those of you who have your weekend coming up, hope you have something fun planned. It's going to be another adventure with our German neighbors, so I'm sure I'll have stories of charades to share with you on the next episode, next Tuesday. But let's see, this week we've just been working and had lunch with a friend of ours today, got caught up with her. We hadn't seen her in a couple of months since before my husband was gone, and then she was gone, and she'd been in London, and she had friends here visiting, and he was gone, so we hadn't seen her in a while. So it's really nice to catch up with her and hear about her adventures. So that's what's going on here. As I mentioned, Connie Berry is my guest today. We are talking about the 4th book in her Kate Hamilton mystery series. Let me give you, the book is called The Shadow of Memory. Let me go ahead and give you the description of that book. As Kate Hamilton plans her upcoming wedding to Detective Inspector Tom Mallory, she is also assisting her colleague Ivor Tweedy with a project at the Netherfield Sanatorium, which is being converted into luxury townhouses. Kate and Ivor must appraise a 15th century painting and verify that its provenance is the Dutch master Jan van Eyck. But when retired criminal inspector Will Parker is found dead, Kate learns that the halls of the sanatorium housed much more than priceless art. Kate is surprised to learn that Will had been the first boyfriend of her friend Vivian Bunn, who hasn't seen him in 58 years. At a seaside holiday camp over 60 years ago, Will, Vivian, and 3 other teens broke into an abandoned house where a doctor and his wife had died under bizarre circumstances 2 years earlier. Now, when a second member of the childhood gang dies unexpectedly, and then a third, it becomes clear that the teens had discovered more in the house than they had realized. Had Will returned to warn his old love? When Kate makes a shocking connection between a 60-year-old murder and the long-buried secrets of the sanatorium, she suddenly understands that time is running out for Vivian and anyone connected to her. So again, that is the description of The Shadow of Memory. Again, it's the 4th book in this series, but this was my first Kate Hamilton book, and while I could tell that there were other stories, other mysteries, other cases were mentioned, I felt that I could read it very easily without needing to read the first 3, although I would love to read the first 3 at sometime when I have some more time. Maybe I'll add that to my audiobook TBL, to be TBLT. I don't know. I'm just going to keep saying TBR because audiobooks are reading. You can argue with me on that one, but I firmly believe audiobooks are reading. Anyway, I would love to read the first 3 and any other books that come out because I really enjoyed this. I like that it is set in England. You get all the wonderful contemporary English murder mystery settings and those sorts of things, but it's fun that you have a main character who is American simply because I am American, and but then she is engaged to an Englishman. He's a detective inspector, so she's got that connection to the police, and she's got English friends, and just a bunch of fun elements that I like. As you know, I'm a bit of an Anglophile myself. I really like England and books set in England, so to kind of, not that I would ever solve a murder. I would be terrible at solving a murder, but having Kate as the main character, having an American in this British crime book story series, is kind of fun to just kind of pretend that I am an American solving crimes in England, which would never happen, like I said. Anyway, let's go ahead and turn to the interview with Connie. Again, the book is called The Shadow of Memory. The author is Connie Berry. Hi, Connie. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi. It's lovely to be with you.
Thank you for being here. I'm excited to talk about your book, your new book, and your series. Before we get to the books, though, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about yourself so my listeners can get to know you, I would appreciate it.
I would be happy to. I'm trying to think of the most important things about me. I am a second generation immigrant to the U.S. And what that means is my history does not go way back like some people. My history goes to Europe. On my mother's side, it was Norwegian and Danish. On my father's side, it was Scotch-Irish. But the important part about that is that the traditions of those countries are still very much alive for my grandparents and my parents. And so that is what I grew up with, is traditions of the old country and why they were so wonderful. And so just kind of having a glowing image of where my forebears came from. I also grew up in the high-end antiques trade. My parents had an antiques business. They had a shop for a while. My father was also an engineer, so his main job was as an engineer, and he had some businesses, manufacturing and stuff, but they just loved the antiques trade. And my father had, from the Scottish background, his grandparents had come over as servants for the Rockefeller family. Apparently, old John D. Rockefeller preferred Scottish servants. I don't know why, but they were first at his house in Pocantico, and then they were caretakers at his summer estate in Lakewood, New Jersey. And that's where my grandfather grew up because of some family issues. He was raised by his grandparents, or actually raised himself, but he was there with his grandparents. And in this big house, which was a mansion in Lakewood, New Jersey, it's now gone. There was a room called the Chinese room, and where they had started to collect some Asian art that they loved. And I think they had a son and a grandson who kind of took off on that. And they have a famous collection. But anyway, as a small boy, my father saw this room and just kind of fell in love with the beauty and the artistry and the skill. So his favorite thing always was Asian art and antiquities. So that's kind of what I grew up with. I studied English literature and history. I have a master's degree. And during college, I attended St. Clair's College, Oxford, where I really fell under the spell of the British Isles. With that background of growing up with Scottish grandparents, I taught theology for 25 years. And I don't think it's the next logical step, but going from theology to murder, I'd always wanted to write mysteries. And once I retired, I decided it was now or never, and just really threw myself into it. I live in Central Ohio with my husband. We have 2 grown sons, and I have a very adorable dog, Emmy.
All right, thank you for that. Whenever I say that, tell me a little bit about yourself. I recognize I should find a different way of phrasing that, because it's really hard to take your entire life and boil it down to, well, yeah, this is who I am.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. Going from theology to murder made me there's something in there. I don't know if that's another book, but
Yeah, could be.
there's something in there. So speaking of the books, the new one is called The Shadow of Memory. It is, I believe, the fourth in this series. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. So can you give an overview of the series to start?
Just in a nutshell, the Kate Hamilton mysteries are set in the UK. They feature an American antique dealer with a gift for solving crime. As you said, there are 4 books in the series so far. They are available in hardback, Kindle, Audible, and my publisher, Crooked Lane Books, is beginning to put them out now in trade paperback. So the first one, A Dream of Death, is out in trade paperback, and the second one, I am just going through that manuscript again in preparation for that publication.
All right.
I should say too that the series is very much in the tradition of the Golden Age. I love that genre. I've read lots and lots of those authors, and they just have inspired me. So that's kind of what I have attempted to do. So they are plot-based, but they're also character-based.
And so in addition to that, kind of that homage to the Golden Age, what else was your initial inspiration for the series, and maybe for Kate?
Well, just in terms of general inspiration, writers are usually told 2 things. They're told, first of all, to write what you know. And so I am writing what I know, and that is the high-end antiques trade. As I said, that's the world that I grew up in. I don't remember anything else. Our house at times looked a little bit like a very crowded, disorganized museum. Objects would come and go. We had a life-size marble bust of Marie Antoinette in our living room for a while. Then that went away, and we got the 3 Graces, and there just were always weird things. I thought it was, of course, perfectly normal, as children always do, and only later have I learned that my friends just thought it was really weird and were almost afraid to go in because they were never sure what they were going to find. But so that was one inspiration. But writers are also told to write what you love, and what I love are British crime novels. And so I'm writing what I know, and I'm writing what I love. But for The Shadow of Memory, I had 3 very specific inspirations. One was a story in 2002 on This American Life about some young boys one summer that explored an abandoned house. And there were really weird things left, like a wallet and glasses and things that people would not normally leave. And I was just absolutely riveted by that story. So that plays a part in the book. I also was inspired by a story in the book, The Road to Little Dribbling. And the name of the author has just escaped me right now. I don't think it's Dave Barry. Well, it's called The Road to Little Dribbling. You can look it up. But the author spent a summer in England working in an insane asylum. And that got me looking into Victorian insane asylums and what they were like, and a new theory that had started in France about how you should treat people with mental illnesses. And it was fascinating. That plays a part. And then the third inspiration was the English holiday camps. After World War II, the British people had little money. They weren't taking airplane trips to Spain or Portugal, but they were going to English holiday camps where it was one price, included the food, your lodging, kind of Hollywood style shows, babysitting, just everything included. And I've always been really fascinated about that.
I'm going to jump in here so we can take our first break of the podcast, but actually the holiday camps were something that I was kind of fascinated with as well. You get kind of these glimpses of the past because it's not a huge part of the entire plot, but it's integral to the plot, so you get these glimpses of it, and it sounds really interesting. I'd like to learn more. We talk a little bit more about that when we come back, and we also, I looked up the name of the author while she was talking, so we're gonna hit that just to kind of refresh your memory that she was looking for the author of the one book that I have now forgotten the name of the book. But you'll get the author after the break. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
The GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. As a reminder, before the break, Connie was talking about some of her inspirations for this particular story, one of which was the book The Road to Little Dribbling, which she couldn't remember the name of the author, and then I couldn't remember the name of the book when I was saying it before the break. So now you're all caught up, so the next little bit of conversation will hopefully make a little bit more sense. The author is Bill Bryson. I looked it up while you were talking.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And then, yes, I was fascinated by the holiday camps. I mean, it plays a role, but you know, it's back in the '60s. But I was kind of fascinated. It kept reminding me of Dirty Dancing a little bit.
Oh yeah,
that's how I kept picturing it. Sort of.
We had something very similar. Yeah. With the exception that many of those were a little more high end than the British camps. They were a little more almost military. You know, each of the rooms that people lived in had these speakers, and it was almost like going to camp as a kid, you know, where you'd say, you know, wake up campers, you know, time to get ready for breakfast. And so it was a little bit more like a child summer camp than it was like the resorts in Dirty Dancing.
That was actually one of the parts that made me that I was intrigued by, because the one character talks about at 7 a.m. good morning campers, rise and shine. That would have driven me absolutely crazy. I'm on vacation. Shut up.
I know. Yeah. But you know, I mean, people were just so thrilled to be able to actually get away and have a family vacation at that time, because all during the war and the years immediately after that, people were not able to do that. They didn't have the resources to do it.
Yeah, exactly. Can you talk a little bit more about Kate as the main character? I love that it's your British mystery crime drama, but you have an American protagonist. So I kind of get the best of some of my favorite worlds. Can you talk a little bit more about Kate?
Yeah. I'd love to. I like Kate a lot, obviously. Kate is a woman in her mid-40s. She is a widow. She had been married to a professor of law at Case Western University. He was Scottish, had grown up on an island in the Scottish Hebrides. She has 2 college-age kids, Christine and Eric. She is, as her parents before her, she is an antique dealer with a thriving business in Northern Ohio. She goes to Scotland in the first book for family reasons. And while she's there, she meets a man, Tom Mallory. He is a detective inspector in the Suffolk Constabulary, England. And they strike up a friendship. They actually work together to solve a mystery, both as outsiders in Scotland. Kate has a gift, or as she likes to think of it, an affliction from childhood, and that is a visceral connection with the objects, the fine objects of great age and great beauty that she deals with as an antique stealer. Her father, who taught her about antiques, called her kind of laughingly a divvy. Someone with the ability to find the single treasure in a whole room full of junk. But it's really more than that, because sometimes with these objects, she can sense the emotional atmosphere in which that object existed, almost as if those emotions had seeped into the cracks and crevices along with the dust and the grime. And sometimes this sense, or sixth sense, takes the form of a word or a phrase. And Kate actually does not understand this. She does not believe in the paranormal. She has never told a soul about this, including Tom Mallory, with whom she's becoming more involved. That's going to become a problem. She always puts it down to her overactive imagination, but that it doesn't ever help her solve crimes, but it does alert her to the fact that all may not be as it seems. One of the other important things about Kate is that she has suffered a series of very tragic losses in her life. She had a Down syndrome brother. She was 5. He was 11 when he died of a congenital heart problem. She had no idea that he had a heart problem. That was one of the issues, is that these losses took her by surprise. On Christmas Eve, when she was 17, her father was killed in a tragic auto accident. And then her husband, Bill, died. Actually, they were on the island in Scotland where he grew up. When that happened, he had a massive heart attack. So because of those losses, Kate, as the series starts, is very reluctant to get herself involved in another relationship. If you never fall in love with someone, you never have to risk losing them. So she is dealing with her fear of loss. She's also, just talking about how she's changed over the course of the book, coming to terms with her abilities in solving crime. She has the ability to see patterns, make connections where other people might not. She is also using her knowledge to help the police in certain cases. So she is, as she has a thriving business in Ohio, she is now coming to have a reputation in the crime-solving community in Suffolk, England.
When it comes to characters, how much character development do you like to do before you start writing, and how much of it is part of the process? How do they change as you write?
Well, I think if characters don't change, an author has a problem, because people change. You can't go through life experiences, especially experiences that are as vivid as the ones Kate goes through, without changing and really thinking through things. When I started the series, I did a lot of research into Kate's character. I don't know if you've heard of Enneagrams, but Enneagrams are a way of looking at a person's personality and seeing strengths and weaknesses, tendencies, and so forth. It's kind of a fascinating thing. But as I've been writing, Kate actually has kind of taken on a life of her own. And she is evolving now, I think, in her own right. And it's very fun to see her do that. She is facing many changes in her life. And she has to deal with them. That's not something that she's been very good at in the past. She tends to be self-protective, but she is having to kind of step out and trust. And so that's not easy. It can be painful.
I have heard of the Enneagram. I am a 6 on the Enneagram.
Okay.
Had to do all of the Myers-Briggs, the Enneagram, a lot of those different types of personality tests. And
I think I might be a 7, but maybe I'm not remembering correctly.
I always have to look it up because I can never remember what I am. I just remember it's the one with loyal in the title. So,
well, that's good.
Yeah. So, How about other characters? Do you like to have a really good sense of who those characters are before you start writing?
I do like to have some sense. And one of the things that I always like to think about is how would they speak? And like the United States, in England, the way that you speak tells people a lot about you. It tells them, first of all, where you grew up, and people can pinpoint these accents with a lot of accuracy. It also tells them what class of society you're in. And as much as we don't like to think about that, there is very definitely a class structure in the UK. It tells them what kind of education you've had. And so one of the very fun things that I like to do is to give each of my characters a very specific way of speaking, in terms of those things, but also just in terms of their personality. So some of the characters are very gentle and kind. Some of them are very plain speaking. Kate's mom, for example, is a very kind person, but she is very plain speaking. She doesn't hold back. She gets right to the point. Others have a little more of an ironic tone. There's some of the British wit that comes in. Creating characters is just the most fun, I think. And I love the characters that I have created, and I really enjoy spending time with them. That's one of the joys, and especially during COVID, when the joys of life were narrowed down a bit, I took great comfort in spending time in the village of Long Barston in Suffolk with characters that I had come to love.
How about research? What types of research did you do for this book specifically?
I think that if you're going to write a book set in another country, you really have to spend time in that country. And I have fortunately had the opportunity to spend a lot of time in the UK during my life. We had to cancel trips, of course, during COVID, but last October, my husband and I spent 3 weeks there. It's just so important, not necessarily to see the sights exactly, but to look at the landscape and to see how that landscape in different parts of the UK has really shaped life, and then to listen to people. One of my favorite things to do in the UK is to go into a pub or into a sidewalk cafe and just listen to conversations. I mean, I don't know, eavesdropping, I guess, isn't the nicest thing to do, but I'm doing it for a very good reason. I'm doing research. And so I listen to how people speak, what they think is funny, what they think is, what makes them mad, what kind of food do they like to eat, how do they treat each other, just a whole range of things. And you hear this in their conversations. And there's just so much that you gain by actually being in the country. And I feel like if I'm going to have a series set in the UK, I have to kind of go back on a regular basis to top up, so to speak, my input of Englishness. And then there's always specific things that I need to research. So the Suffolk coastline was one of them. That's something that I did on that trip in October. But I also do a lot of reading. I do a lot of reading about setting. I do a lot of research into the particular objects that Kate deals with. I mean, obviously, growing up in the antiques trade, I have a background, but still, I really have to know what these objects are. So I look a lot at the auction sites, Sotheby's, Christie's, that kind of thing. And then there are the more subtle aspects, and that is the English mindset. And one of the wonderful resources that I have found is a book called Watching the English by Kate Fox. It's a kind of a fat book. It's very funny, but she goes into all of the different aspects of how English people look at life and their quirks. And it's been not only a lot of fun to read, but it's been very helpful too.
I love that. That sounds really fascinating. Time for our second break of the podcast. But yes, it does sound fascinating. It is something I'm going to have to add to my to be read, to be listened to, whatever list you want to put that on. Dang it, Connie, you're making my list really long. More longer. I almost said more longer. That's terrible. Since my grammar has gone to pot, let's take a break. When we come back, we will be talking about why Connie writes mysteries, what it is about this genre that attracts her to reading and writing within it. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. I'm speaking today with author Connie Berry about the fourth book in her Kate Hamilton mystery series. That book is called The Shadow of Memory. Let's return to the interview. And to your point of, spending time in a place, I've only spent 3 days in England so far. We went in August just for a really quick trip to visit some friends. And one day we spent sightseeing. So we did, the hop on, hop off tour. And so we saw all the major London sites, which was great. But even more fun for me, I think, was just spending time in their neighborhood with our friends, walking around, seeing people's houses, seeing, just kind of day-to-day life. I was even more fascinated by that.
Yeah, I would be too. That was a good opportunity.
Yeah. When it comes to writing, what do you think draws you to writing mysteries?
I don't exactly know what has drawn me to writing mysteries. And I would say that before I began to write them, what drew me to reading mysteries? I'm not sure, but I do know that when I was a child, I wrote stories, and my mother, who saved everything, she was not a hoarder, but maybe kind of close to it, especially papers. She didn't want to throw away papers. So I have most of the stories that I wrote, and as I look back on them, they're actually pretty funny. But interestingly to me, they all involve some kind of mystery. Now, obviously not murder mysteries or bodies, but some strange thing that needs to be solved. And I don't know why. I've always been drawn to that. I just like it when things don't make sense and someone has to make sense of it. I actually like that in real life as well. I can't leave, like if something doesn't, it's just not logical, or I just can't let it alone. That's probably a fault, but I need to find out. I have to be able to understand what that happened, why that happened, and all about it. So I think that's just maybe part of who I am.
Mm-hmm. When it comes to writing the mysteries that Kate solves, where do you start? Do you start with the murder? Do you start with what you see as the solution to the murder? Which end do you start at?
I try to look at the whole book. I'm some people are plotters and plot out the entire book in like a long 15, 20 page outline. I don't do that, but I'm not also what they call a pantser. Pantsers just start a book. They have no idea where it's going or what's even going to happen. They just let it unfold. I admire those people. I think would be very fun, but I am in between. I'm what they call a plantser. So I like to have a very general idea of where the book is going. So I have in my mind major plot points along the way to get me from the beginning to the end. But I don't know really how I'm going to get from point A to point B and then from point B to point C. So there's both plotting and pantsing going on. And during the course of writing, it is not unusual at all for something to change, for the characters to kind of take things off in a new direction. And when that happens, when I'm writing and I actually I'm just typing out and all of a sudden I've typed something and I hadn't planned it, it's almost always exactly the right thing. So I don't know if there's like an unconscious brain that you have as a writer that is actually directing you from within and you're not conscious of it, but whatever it is, I love when that happens and I wish it would happen more.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I've talked to other authors who have similar experiences, and I'm just, I don't know if it would freak me out to just suddenly type something that I wasn't expecting, or if I would be able to accept it as the gift that it might be.
I had an example of this in my second book, which is called A Legacy of Murder. One of my very favorite characters in this book is an elderly antiquities dealer by the name of Ivor Tweedy, and Kate now in the fourth book is working with him, but she meets him in the second book because there is a suspect in a death, an unexplained death, and the suspect went to school with Ivor Tweedy. So Kate is going to do a little bit of investigating, and she's talking to him about it, and she can tell that Ivor is very certain that this suspect is not guilty. So she's trying to delve into it. And so I'm just kind of typing away, doing the dialogue. And at one point I'm typing, Kate asks him, how can you be so sure that he's not guilty? And then I go, and Ivor said, because he's dead. And that really took me by surprise. I just stopped and I looked at it and I thought, really? He's dead? And that turned out to be kind of an important point. I had to then go back and sort of lead up to that. But I honestly had no prior knowledge that Ivor was going to say that. So, again, I'm like Kate, I don't think anything supernatural is going on here. I just think that there's something about the unconscious mind that helps the writers of fiction. And a lot of ideas come to me actually in that kind of liminal time between sleep and wakefulness. Mm-hmm. And I think that's also a time that psychologists will tell us is a time when our creative minds kind of come to the forefront. Mm-hmm. So those are great gifts when they happen. As I said, I wish it would happen more.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Ivor because I kind of feel like he needs a spin-off series of some sort because you can't just drop things like reindeer wrestling and wherever it was.
I know. I know.
Move on.
Yeah. He's had great adventures in his life and never explains. He never explains them. So
exactly. Do you have an overall arc in mind for the series, or are you just going to keep writing as long as Kate keeps giving you stories?
I think I'm going to keep writing as long as my publisher gives me contracts. And that very much depends on how the books sell. Publishing is a business. They are in the business of making money. And so it's all about book sales. It really is. And that's why writers who would love to spend more time alone in their offices typing have to spend a lot of time also just in the business of publicity, marketing, things that don't necessarily come to us naturally, but you just have to, because it's all about book sales. So right now, there are 4 books that are published in this series. There will be, I know, at least 5, because I have a contract for book 5 that will be coming out. And whether there will be books after that, I don't know. In the back of my mind, I've thought about another series that might be an historical set in England. But I'm just working on the books I have right now, working on the contracts I have right now.
Sure, makes sense. So is that what you're working on right now? Is book 5 or something else?
I started working on book 5. I put that aside because my publisher asked me to write a novella. That will be about 40,000 words, I think, when it's all done. That will come out next year. That is one smaller incident in Kate's life that I didn't really felt deserved an entire novel, but I didn't want to pass over it either. So I thought about a novella. So I'm just, that is into my editor right now, and I'm waiting to get comments back from her. But then book 5, I have part way done, and that is my title for it is called The Witness of Blood. I don't know if that will be the actual title, but so there will be at least a novella and then a book 5.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned you've always written, you wrote stories as a kid. What was the impetus, or what made you decide to then start writing for possible publication?
That has always been my dream. And I really have to credit my mother with that. My mother was a school teacher before I was born. And then when I came along, she had, and I'm an only child. My parents were older when I was born. She had basically one student, so I was her student. So I had the great advantage of a mother who loved books, loved stories, read to me constantly. And I think built into me too has always been a desire to make life a little more interesting, kind of to fictionalize life and to make life more glamorous, more intriguing, more mysterious, something like that. And you would probably call it lying. When I was a child, in my attempts to make life more interesting, I would lie. I used to run away from home, or I'd run like 2 streets over, gosh, I'm telling a lot more about myself than I probably should, but I'd go like 2 streets over, find a nice lady and tell her that I was lost.
Oh, no.
And then she would bring me in and give me soda and cookies. And, in the meantime, my poor mother's frantic. I used to get lost on purpose in department stores a lot. I used to tell people that this is when I was like 3 and 4 and 5. I used to tell people that I took ballet lessons and horseback riding lessons, and because I just wanted life to be more interesting. So my mother, who is a school teacher, recognized in me this desire to fictionalize life, and she had the wisdom to direct that into writing stories. And so she got me started writing my own stories, and that was the outlet for making these interesting lives with things that didn't actually happen but could have happened, and wouldn't it have been wonderful if they did happen. So I'm very grateful to her for that. But that is really when I started writing. And as I said, I've just always loved stories, and I want to know why things are the way they are. What would happen if something else happened? How would people deal with it? How would it be resolved? I think most writers must have that also.
Well, I'm really glad that you grew up to be an author and not a psychopath.
Yes, exactly. Thank you, Mother.
That's wonderful. Oh, my tact knows no bounds, or it has no bounds, or it needs bounds, something. Anyway, on that note, let's go ahead and take our final break of the podcast. When we come back, Connie will be sharing her advice for aspiring authors. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast, the show that gives you advice on everything travel. We explore places you've always wanted to go, as well as giving tips for traveling in those places. We'll give you advice on the best sites for travel tips, information, and discounts. Join us as we travel the world, explore cultures, and meet new people. The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast has got you covered. Download the GSMC Travel Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and the conclusion of my interview with author Connie Berry.
From your own experience, do you have advice for aspiring authors?
I think I've got two things. One is there are so many people that want to write a book and so many people that begin to write a book, but the number of people that actually finish the book is relatively very small. So I would say, don't give up, just persevere, get that book written, even if it's not a book that's ever going to be published. You've got to get that book through to the end and then maybe start something different. But the other piece of advice that I actually think is more important is take the time to learn craft. I, having read all my life, an English literature major with a master's in English literature, having read mysteries, I obviously knew good writing. My taste in writing is very, very high. I did not know how to write a mystery. With all my background, I did not know how to write it. And I am also impatient and impulsive, and I did not want to take the time to learn. But I finally did. And so learning just some very simple things about how you write a book, what readers expect in a book. It's so worthwhile to take that time. You actually are going to save yourself a lot of wasted effort by taking the time to learn the craft of writing. So join writers groups, join critique groups, have people read your writing and comment, take writing classes, go to conferences. There's just so many ways that you can teach yourself how to write the kind of book that you really want to write.
Thank you for that. Obviously, you love reading. Do you have, well, you probably have a ton of books that you've read and that are on your to-be-read list, but can you pinpoint some favorite genres and authors?
I'm almost embarrassed to say that I read almost entirely British crime fiction. That is my passion. I am in 2 book clubs, which are helpful to me because they get me reading things that I wouldn't ordinarily read. And I love those things too, but I would always choose British crime fiction. And I like all aspects of it. I love police procedurals. I love traditionals. I like some cozies. I love historicals. So some of the authors that are my favorites, just trying to think of a list. There's so many, but Anne Cleeves. I'm kind of on an Anne Cleeves jag right now. I'm reading, actually rereading the Vera Stanhope novels, which are wonderful. Anthony Horowitz, Robert Galbraith, who's actually J.K. Rowling. Deborah Crombie, she's an American, but writes wonderful series a police procedural based in the UK. Ellie Griffiths, Susan Hill, the late Peter Granger. I could go on and on and on, but there's just so many wonderful authors out there. And I love to read I wish I had more time for reading, but I do the best I can.
You recently went on vacation. You went to Europe, and when you went, did you take actual physical books, or did you take? Do you read on a Kindle when you travel like that?
I always take I don't take a Kindle, but I take my phone. So I've got, all of my Kindle books on my phone. But actually, I didn't do a lot of reading in France because I had been under a lot of pressure. I've been doing some reading that my publisher asked me to do for blurbing books, and I've been doing some reading, kind of beta reading for some of my friends. And I just finished the first draft of my novella, and I just wanted to have a break. So I basically took a break for 2 weeks, and then I was really eager to get back. So I'm right back in the thick of things now. But I do think sometimes you do have to take a break.
Yeah, a bit of a palate cleanser for reading.
Yeah. There you go.
Internet presence. You have a website, and where can people find you on social media?
I have on Facebook, I'm Connie Berry Author. I'm at Connie C. Berry on Twitter. I have a website, which is connieberry.com. And on there, you can sign up for my monthly newsletter. I just sent one out. It's called The Plot Thickens. And I actually enjoy writing that a lot. So hopefully people will sign up. And I wish I could say I was on Instagram. I should be, but I'm not.
It's a lot, and they keep adding new ones. So
I know there's TikTok and all kinds of things. So I'm just trying to keep up. You can only do so much.
Yeah, there's only so many hours in a day. You're right.
Yeah,
Connie, we've talked about a lot of different things during our time together, but is there anything that we haven't covered that you would like to mention, whether it's about the series or writing, anything at all?
We really have covered a lot. I think the only things that I could possibly add would be the fact that one of my favorite things to do is to join book clubs. I just got through doing one of them that was from Florida. So I've done them from California and Arizona and the Northeast and all over. So if anyone has a book club and would like to have a Zoom visit, I would love to do that. I also really enjoyed doing some presentations for writers groups. I do one on setting. I also do one on making time to write. And I have another one that is on developing characters. So when I was teaching theology, I really feel like I am a teacher at heart. So I enjoy doing those things as well. I hope people find my books. I hope they read them. And if they like them, one of the very best things you can do to encourage writers and to help them in their career is to leave reviews on Amazon or Goodreads. It really makes a difference.
Yes, it does. It's really important.
Yeah.
Well, I want to say thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me about Kate and about Shadow of Memory, about the whole series. I really appreciate your time.
Oh, Sarah, thank you so much. It's been just a joy to be with you. It took us a little while to get this going, but we finally did. And you asked wonderful questions. I'm delighted to have been here.
Thank you to Connie so much for joining me, for, again, being flexible, as I said, and working with getting this rescheduled. I really appreciate that. And just for sharing her thoughts on writing and the series, the most recent book, of course, and potential books or potential future books, all of those wonderful things. So just thank you to Connie for a great conversation. If you are a fan of mysteries, of murder mysteries, of mysteries set in England, then you should definitely, of contemporary mysteries, you should definitely check out The Shadow of Memory. But I always like to start a series from the beginning. So start with that first book, work your way through, because if you love series, then you've already got 4 to read. You don't have to wait in between. You've got 4 to just jump right in, which is something that I love. I love when I find a new series and there are multiple books out, so you can binge those books and have less time, well, maybe not less time to wait for the new one, but you're not waiting between each one as you binge the first few books in a series. So definitely check out this Kate Hamilton mystery series if this is something that appeals to you. As always, thank you for listening. And if you are a fan of the podcast, just as Connie was saying about reviews for authors, that also helps this podcast. So if you haven't left a review and you would like to, it'd be great. Starred or written, either way helps get the podcast out to more listeners. Also make sure that you like, subscribe, follow, etc. on the podcast platform that you listen to this podcast on. That way you'll get a notification when there are new episodes. So when there's an episode like this that's on a Friday instead of a Tuesday, you will get a notification and you'll know that there's a new episode. Also, follow on social media: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Love hearing from listeners, and just hit me up with what you're reading, what you want to read, any questions you have, all those wonderful things. I do love hearing from listeners. So follow on social media if you are not doing so already. Next episode, I have a returning author. Author Kelly Riley will be joining me to talk about Royally Scandalized. It is another book in the series that we talked about last time she was here. So Royally Scandalized, there, obviously there is a royal in this book. In this case, a royal in disguise, going undercover to solve a bit of a family mystery. So romance, we're moving to contemporary romance. Join me for that episode. In the meantime, hope you have a wonderful weekend. If you have plans, I hope that they are great and enjoyable. And regardless of if you have plans or no plans, fun plans or, weekend running errands or catching up on housework plans, I hope that you also find yourself having plenty of time to get yourself lost in 1, 2, even 10 good books. Thank you so much.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.